Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to episode 47 of The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. We are typically a pretty low-tech show, but we're going to change that today. I'm joined in the studios of OPB by a phalanx of tech-savvy journalists who are going to tell us about robots in the food industry, the tension between food and tech, and the innovations that are changing the way we drink. Our esteemed panelists today are Drew Prindle, Emerging Technologies Editor at Digital Trends, an online publication covering technology, news, and culture. Welcome, Drew.
Thanks for having me.
And Chase McPeak, Associate Editor of Lifestyle at The Manual, the sibling publication, or I guess I should say brother publication, of Digital Trends. Welcome.
Great. Thanks to be here. Thank you.
And Sam Slaughter, Food and Drink Editor at The Manual. And you can also catch Sam on The Manual's Beer, Booze, and Bacon podcast.
Yes, hello.
Nice to see you again, Sam.
Yeah, it's great.
Now for our first course, how robots are changing the food and egg industries. Drew Prindle, the Future of Food series you recently edited for Digital Trends covered innovations like Swiss weed killer robots and robotic bees. Tell me more. How are the next generation of robots changing agribusiness and food?
I wish I had like a really succinct answer for that, but it's kind of like a tough thing that's, continuously evolving. So I think the important thing to remember when you're talking about robots and agriculture and food is that robots are kind of just like the latest chapter in a very long saga of just us trying to make agriculture more efficient. That's been something that we've been trying to do pretty much since the dawn of agriculture. So it's kind of been slowly progressing, and we went from, using oxen and plows and stuff, and then we got tractors. Now we're kind of in the robot age, and really all that is just more automation. The machines that we're using are more advanced, and they can pull off more work, and farmers can achieve the same amount of productivity with smaller amounts of like farmhands, basically. So there's a lot going on. There's tons of examples of this. Just to point out a few, there's I guess weed killing robots is one that you brought up. There's a startup in California that has one that it's solar powered. It kind of roves around through fields, and it has cameras that can see and discern weeds from crops. It uses machine learning, which is a kind of AI, so it can kind of just like it knows what kind of plant it's looking at, and then it will selectively spray that with herbicides. Instead of spraying all of the crops with herbicides, it can just give a little tiny dose to it. So that makes it much more efficient. There's less runoff. It costs less money for the farmer. So that's just one example.
And not only are you putting fewer herbicides into the soil and having it run off into water, but you also don't have human beings working so close to herbicides.
To dangerous chemicals.
It's very dangerous, yeah. That's a great innovation.
Yeah. But that I'd say is one example of how it's happening in like the cultivation side. Then there's also like harvesting robots. Pretty much any crop that you can think of has some sort of robot that's designed to harvest it. And sometimes they're partially human operated, like you'll see like mechanical threshers or plows and stuff. There's self-driving tractors. But there's also even more sophisticated ones now, like another startup that's, I believe, from MIT is they're working on apple picking robots, which is a really tough challenge for a robot. Like it's something that you and I take for granted. Like you just reach out and pick the apple, right? But for a robot to look out and recognize that that's an apple, that's the part of the tree that I want to pick, and then move itself into position and then pick it without crushing it is like this monumental engineering task. And we've only recently kind of reached the point where those kinds of things are possible. So it is happening, and there are these kinds of projects happening all over the place, but I'd say we're still very much in the early stages. So these kinds of crazy herbicidal robots and apple picking robots are here, but they're not deployed widely.
It's interesting because it ties into the question of our labor force.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that at the turn of the 19th to 20th century, 50% of the world's population was involved in agricultural work, agricultural labor, and now it's just 2%.
Yeah. And I think with this trend toward more automation and more robotics, that's going to continue. like whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing is still kind of up for debate. Generally speaking, people think that, I mean, it is going to impact the workforce, but it's going to kind of shift things toward more skilled workers and fewer of them. So instead of, just laborers that are, picking plants and cutting them and putting them in boxes, it's going to be people who are maybe like engineers or software people that are like programming robots to kind of do these things for you, or just overseeing like a fleet of robots. So yeah, the trend is going to be toward fewer workers doing more technical and skilled jobs on the farm.
What do you know about drones? I feel like I keep hearing that there are drones in the field.
Drones are, they're just one subset of robots, right? They're flying robots. And drones have a pretty interesting role in agriculture now, I think, and we're still just kind of like figuring this out, like what they can do for us. But really, you can strap any kind of sensor that you want on a drone. And one thing, one of the applications, just to give you an example that they're doing, is like, you can put a sensor on a drone that can sense how much like moisture there is in the soil. And then you could fly that up over your crops, and it would just take a picture basically. And then the farmer could see on his computer, oh, this is an area where I'm not getting enough irrigation. And then they can more selectively go in there and, irrigate those crops, make sure that they don't die, and then just have a more productive harvest ultimately.
Sam, you're a beverage guy, a food and beverage guy. I find it so ironic that we are moving so far forward with innovation in robotics and technology in farming, and yet the kind of the cool styles of farming are all artisan throwbacks to caveman days. Like, what's going on?
I think there's a balance of these things, because we have to be producing for a big enough audience. When Drew, you were talking about this irrigation stuff, it reminds me a lot of wineries do that so that they can better grow the grapes to get to an optimal level, and then they know when to pick them because they're flying over every day with a plane or a helicopter or a drone. And these are wineries that are producing thousands of cases at a time, or every harvest season. And so being able to do that for these bigger companies, I think, is important. When you're going to the farmers market here in Portland or wherever, those are, I would guess, a lot of the times they're not that scale. They're probably never going to be that scale. They're giving products and creating products for a much smaller audience. And so I think that's where that's the big difference. So if you're working towards making sure that your seed corn is in 18, 20, whatever countries around the world, the robotics, the innovation is important, because you're going to need, your costs are going to be so much higher than a farmer who's doing bloody butcher corn for a very small grits operation in South Carolina, say.
What's a bloody butcher corn?
Bloody butcher is a style of corn that has come up. It's in some whiskeys. Widow Jane, which is a distillery in Brooklyn, they do a bloody butcher corn. There's a couple of other distilleries that use it to make whiskey, but they also make it a lot in they use it for grits.
And Sam is based in South Carolina. Now I understand why you know so much about bloody butcher.
Spend a lot of time around the final products of corn.
Got it.
It's also fun. I mean, last name Slaughter, bloody butcher. It goes together for me.
It's your personal corn variety.
That is my personal corn variety if I had to choose.
Yeah, I think Sam brings up a great point about this sort of economic value and economies of scale when it comes to technology and smaller sort of businesses, agro-businesses focusing more on heritage. And I think it's really just a matter of these smaller farms can't afford to buy a drone. They can't afford to buy sort of an automated tractor. And because of that, they've got to specialize. And that specialization is going to turn towards something that people are more invested and interested in. So, for example, you're not going to have robots rounding up, cattle out in the field. But you are going to have a nice, really well-raised heritage, cow that eventually is going to be harvested and is going to provide excellent meat to a few select people as opposed to, the entire population of the country. So I think that also is a major factor when it comes to tech and agribusiness.
Well, Chase, you have a really good point, and kind of makes me want to dig into our next topic, which is the tension between food and tech. And I find it so interesting that Digital Trends publishes the manual. Everyone, listeners, you got to go online and check out Digital Trends and then check out the manual. What's your URL? Is it just themanual.com?
Themanual.com.
Themanual.com. Because digital trends, it's everything new and innovative, things you've never heard of before, flying through the sky. And then the manual, it seems like it's kind of like a men's magazine. And it seems like the kinds of things you guys feature and hone in on are kind of old school and traditional. So there's like this weird tension between the two publications.
Yeah, I think that it's there, but I also think that it's a lot of fun. So our tagline is we're the essential guide for men. And so, like you pointed out, we do sort of like this more old school heritage style, and especially when it comes to food and drink. So, for example, we're going to be talking more about a really great cast iron skillet than we are about there's a new product on the line. It's an electric digital skillet that you can connect it to your phone via an app, and you can adjust the temperature from wherever you are. So essentially, you could be sitting in your living room, and you could be cooking a steak, and the pan itself is going to monitor it for you. Now, from our perspective, that's probably not the best way that you want to cook a steak, because you're not involved with it. You're not there. You're not really feeling it. You're not smelling it. And you're not really gauging it. So you might be relying on a piece of technology to make sure that it's cooked through, but in the end, you're not going to know unless you're actually there yourself. So there's that very important difference between technology maybe being a little excessive to the point where it becomes almost less useful. As opposed to just what I like to refer to as super low tech. So, cast iron skillets, really great like cookie sheets, that sort of thing, aluminum bakeware, all made in America. These things that are really solid and durable and are going to last a lifetime. That's not something you can really say about an electric pan. That's probably going to last 5 years and then short out for you.
That is a good point.
I think to your point, Chase, too, at least from my perspective, I would much rather know how to use a cast iron and then work my way up from there, be able to use the high-tech monitoring pan if I can, but at the end of the day, I don't need to rely on that. I can pull out a cast iron and I can reverse sear a steak or do whatever I need to do to make that meal on my own. Those kind of skills are what we're looking for, and then we just build off of there.
Yes, absolutely. I 100% agree. If you've got that knowledge within you, you've learned to use something, you've got that skill. It's sort of like the teach a man to fish scenario, Don't give him the fish, just give him the skills to be able to catch that fish. And that's sort of what we want to provide for our readers and our audience, is that ability to, really hone in on how something is created and cooked in the kitchen and then take that with them throughout the rest of their life. But I do want to talk about tech and food just in general, because I feel like they've always gone hand in hand. So fire, right? The original food tech that started everything off. And then from there, you've got things like ovens, and then even canning. So, Napoleon was conquering Europe because he had his, food scientists, I'm doing air quotes right now, develop canning so that, he could feed his army, and an army marches on his stomachs. And up until even the present, so we've got refrigerators now that you can connect them to your phone via an app, and there's a camera inside. And so if you're at the grocery store and you forget, do I actually have milk or not, you can just click into your app and see. So there's something to be said about the benefit of the ease in which you can acquire food and make food through technology. And then that also goes hand in hand with what we're seeing now with subscription food boxes that you can order online. They arrive right to your door with all the ingredients, and then you can just make a meal from there. So there, again, like we said, there is that sort of tension. There's this up and down between too much tech and not enough tech. And the manual sort of likes a place right in the middle. That's what we suggest.
Drew, what does your kitchen look like? Is it full of gadgets?
Not particularly, no. I don't know about you guys, but I'm totally okay with technology and robots and other things kind of like cultivating my food and getting it to my house. But when I'm cooking and preparing food, tech has very little presence. I feel like it should almost not be there, because cooking is a very human thing. What else do you do 3 times a day that's so vital to your survival? That's something very personal that I don't think I'm necessarily comfortable handing off to a robot or even an automated pan, right? You should be involved in that. That is your livelihood, that's what's keeping you going. So no, there's not a lot of tech in my kitchen. I do have one thing that I occasionally use and I really enjoy it. It's a sous vide machine. I don't know if you're familiar with sous vide. It's a method of cooking any food really just like in a vacuum sealed bag in water, and it's a very precise way of doing it. And essentially you can cook like the best steaks ever with that as long as you can sear them afterwards. And I'd say that's probably the only kitchen gadget I have.
You know, you have a good point, Drew, about kind of how food is so personal, because I have tried various, those box kits, whatever you want to call them, Blue Apron and that kind of thing. And my frustration is always, well, I don't want exactly that, because I always like to tweak a recipe. I really want some sour cream in that, or I want to add something else. And you kind of have to stick with the specific ingredients they send. And it's like, well, what if I want that with quinoa instead of rice? And
yeah, it leaves no room for creativity, which is like it's like a fundamental like need, right? When you're cooking, you want to personalize it for yourself, and if you kind of lose that ability, like I don't know, something's wrong with that.
Well, didn't you guys cover this place Spice in Boston where robots make your food? I feel like
Yeah, we wrote a little news post about it, and it's. You guys should definitely check this out if you haven't, but just get on YouTube and search Spice. I think it's in Boston.
With a Y instead of an I.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the way that they do stuff, they have this insane setup. It's all robotic chefs, and it's kind of like those electric pans that you were talking about, Chase, except they're kind of bowls. And these robots dump the ingredients in. They know how long each of them take to cook. They kind of stir them autonomously by like rolling the little bowl. And they cook everything perfectly and then dump it into a bowl. And really all the humans have to do is grab the bowl and serve it to somebody. And it's like a fast casual restaurant, and it seems to be doing pretty well. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, it's probably pretty good. And I think their whole reasoning for it was hard to get like a good, healthy, like well-cooked meal for a reasonable price, because, when you go to a restaurant, they have to pay all of their chefs, but this place doesn't. So they could sell this healthy food at a lower price and make it more accessible for more people, which I totally support. But I still don't know how I feel about robots cooking my food.
Well,
Yeah.
It looks like there still is that element of creativity, though, because the consumer kind of fills out on an iPad exactly what they want, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're definitely getting what they want, but I don't know if for me personally, it might be a little frightening. I'm thinking of like the Jetsons and Rosie the robot. Like imagining a robot like making my dinner in the kitchen, and I'm just like Drew was pointing out earlier, I'm a little skeptical that they'll be able to get the taste correct and get the ratio of spices properly. I know at Spice itself that they have this very scientific formula where they they do have prep cooks who create, chop up the vegetables and everything and put them in hoppers, and essentially the robotic chef, I suppose, just sort of dumps them into the bowl as you go along. But again, like Drew pointed out, they do have to have a human at the very end to sort of finish it off. And I think that's the element that we're always going to need when it comes to food. I personally wouldn't want a robot to create my Thanksgiving dinner. I would rather my grandmother have some hand in that.
Are you afraid of not having the right spice profile, Chase, or are you really just secretly afraid of the robot uprising?
I mean, a little bit of both, right, Sam? I've seen Terminator.
Well, have any of you guys been to any of these robotic grocery stores yet?
I have not, but I did see some roving grocery stores are coming around.
Yeah, the RoboMart.
Yeah, the RoboMart. Very interesting. I think that is probably one of the best developments that I've seen coming out of conceptual food and tech merging together. What they are is essentially they are roving refrigerators full of produce and meat, and they're typically piloted, or their pilot programs are set up by local stores, grocery stores, and then they fill them with their produce and they send them out, and you can have an app on your phone and call it to you, and it's essentially a moneyless checkout system where you've already put your bank account information in there. You just grab what you want out of this after it arrives right in front of your house, and then you go back in and you cook your food. So for me, this is a great place. This looks like it's a great development for people who might necessarily live in food deserts or in rural areas where they might not necessarily be able to get to the grocery store as quickly. I think this is a really great development as far as access to food.
But it might end the practice of knocking on your neighbor's door and asking, "Do you have a lemon? Do you have any milk?"
Right, Catherine, and I won't be coming over and asking for sugar anymore. Yeah, it's sort of a sad, community-destroying robot.
We actually covered a concept called bodega a few episodes ago. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I have not.
It was very poorly thought out. It was very tone deaf. It was supposed to replace the neighborhood bodega, and basically the concept just sort of insulted entire communities of people. But I kind of like this roving store. It seems like it's a little, I don't know, it seems like a better idea. Be interested to see them roving around town.
Yeah, and one of the things that I dislike the most about grocery shopping is the actual shopping process. It's like running through the store and dealing with all of the crowds, and so I'm like a Sunday morning 6 a.m. kind of person, but if we had one of these roving stores, I would definitely sign up.
Sam, I get the idea you're like a farmer's market kind of guy.
I try to be. Greenville, South Carolina, where I live, has a fantastic farmers market. It's recognized on lists of farmers markets, since there are lists of farmers markets now. But I try and go every Saturday when I'm in town and pick up. There's fresh pasta. Obviously, a lot of vegetables are coming in from the surrounding area. And they've even there's a wonderful creamery in Travelers Rest just a few miles north that makes some amazing cheeses. And so it's a really great opportunity for me to not only get really good food, really fresh food, but to talk to the people, to talk to the producers of this, whatever I'm buying. Because I love being able to talk to a creator of something, to talk about the cheese. Like, why did you decide to do a blue cheese for the first time? How did you get the milk? Where are you getting all this stuff from? Things like that. I just enjoy that. So walking around with a coffee and buying some stuff, going home, and then having fresh produce or whatever it is for the next few days until I inevitably eat it all way too quickly is great.
Yeah, another issue that comes up with tech kind of robots dealing with our food and tech in the food industry is, jobs aren't only being replaced out in the field, but they're also being replaced in the restaurant. And just having that human connection is really important, isn't it?
I think it really is, Catherine. That for me, who sits at a bar a lot on the road or wherever, I love being able to talk to someone about them or about the bar or about the city I'm in if I've never been there. It's a really great way to get a lot of knowledge quickly, because these are the people that have all of that, because they see all of the locals, they see all of the tourists, they are up on the events in town because they have to be. It's part of their job to know what's going on around them. And so I see them, bartenders, servers, whatever it is, as kind of like the keys to a lot of information in any city you go in.
Okay, well, you mentioned bars, which makes me thirsty for a craft cocktail. And Sam, I understand the manual has Craft Spirits Week coming up. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, in the fall, we are launching our first Craft Spirit Awards, or Spirit Awards, rather. And we have, over the past couple of months, been working our way through a number of American distilleries in 9 different categories, so from bourbon to rye to vodka and flavored vodka, even American brandies. We've been tasting things, talking about the spirits, talking about what makes them a good spirit, and we finally culled it down. We did some more blind tasting of the finalists, and we've chosen our finalists in these 9 categories that we feel are the ultimate expression of spirits, of craft spirits in the United States for 2017. 2018. I promise I know what year it is. But we've gone through, and we really want to show that the smaller distilleries are doing amazing things all around the country. The winners come from, there's one from right around here in Portland. There's one from Wyoming. There's one from Louisiana. They are all around the country producing amazing products sometimes using grains or whatever from other places, sometimes using sugar cane or something from the country, from inside the United States borders. That we're not so much concerned with, but the final product, what's in the bottle, what goes into the glass, we are fans of it. We love it. We want to support those distilleries. We want to show people why those things should be looked out for when you're at a Total Wine or whatever the liquor stores are out here. I'm not sure. I know they're state-run. That's all I know.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Sam, what kind of categories do you have for these awards? Like, is there one for whiskey, one for gin, one for vodka? Is that kind of how it's broken down?
We decided on 9 different categories. I've got this. Vodka, flavored vodka, gin, bourbon, rye, single malt American whiskey, which is a much bigger category than it would have been 5 or even 10 years ago. There are many American single malt whiskeys. So if you are a whiskey fan and you're used to drinking Scotch whiskey, those are going to be very similar in style. A little bit smokier. They're using malted barley, things like that. American brandy, rum, unaged rum, and then aged rum. I believe those are all 9 categories.
I'm into it.
I was too.
I'm kind of dying of curiosity. I can't wait to see who the winners are.
There's some good ones on there. I'm happy with all of the ones that we chose, and I'm excited for them to find out as well.
Well, okay, so I just said the term craft cocktail, and you were just talking about all these wonderful little micro distillers. And when we think of these kind of higher end beverages, we think of craft and these beverages being hand distilled and hand fermented. But I would love to just, we've been talking about automation and tech this whole episode. So let's talk about that in regards to beverage. I mean, I know in Japan you can, of course there's a vending machine for everything. You can go to a vending machine and get a quote unquote craft cocktail shaken up for you. Sam, what are you seeing in terms of tech in the beverage? And I'm most interested in sort of the quote unquote artisanal beverage category.
Yeah, there's been moves in that kind of field, just as in farming and all of these other fields. There's a bar in Las Vegas right now that the bartenders are robots, and so they are making craft cocktails at a high volume for a lot of people because it's Vegas and there's always a ton of people there. But then there's also companies have come out with like tabletop home editions of these where you can load up 6 different spirits into the side, you use an app on your phone, and you basically just pick out what cocktail you want and it makes it for you, and then you grab it and you go. I can see the benefit of that if you are not one to be crafty or not one to want to spend that time. Like if you're having a party and you want to interact with people, if I want to come over and talk to Drew about whatever his work week was like, or if I promise Chase a tour of my house if he's never seen it before, I can't be behind the bar. That's great. For me, I probably still would want to be the one making the drinks because of that personal touch.
I had my 13-year-old make my gin and tonic the other night, and I was like, is there something wrong about this? Maybe I need one of those robots.
I mean, if it was a good one and they weren't consuming it, that's still probably...
That was my question. Was it a good gin and tonic?
Well, my kids always do take one taste of whatever I'm tasting because they know I'm a beverage geek. So she did take one taste, and she was like, oh, it's kind of bitter. I was like, that's the point.
It'll be bitter until she or he is 21.
Yeah.
And then maybe it won't be. Who knows?
Yeah. So you had a really interesting article, Sam, about Palmas Winery. Is that right?
Yes, it was.
Tell us about it.
So Palmas is a winery in the Napa Valley in California, and the easiest way to conceive of it, I think, is it looks like like a mad scientist laboratory mixed with where nuclear codes would be entered and something would happen if it did. It's the winery itself is on 610-ish acres, something like that, in Napa, but almost all of their winemaking operations are underground. So it goes the entire winery stretches down 240 feet, which is equivalent of like 22 stories of a building.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so you go in and you go down and you walk into where the fermentation tanks are, and it's sort of a concave.
It's a dome.
Convex?
A dome. There we go. Simple words. Thank you, Drew.
You're in the wrong time zone right now, right?
Yes, that's totally what it is. I'm on East Coast time.
Has nothing to do with the booze you've been tasting while you're here.
So the winery
For work.
This was a professional endeavor. But the tanks are there, and they rotate under where the grapes come in and all of that. So that in itself is really cool to see those tanks moving around. But
on their own, just they're not being pushed around.
No, it's all automated. They pump, type in some buttons, and but the true kind of gem of this is the system that they call Felix, which brings up so much information on the ceiling itself. So it's it's mind-blowing to kind of take in. They've got, they can figure out if something is going to go wrong within 36 hours in the future, because they've got all of the data from the time that the grapes have been picked, and even before that, up through every minute little detail of the fermentation process. So a winemaker can go in, use their phone, pull up whatever fermenter they want to look at, and that data will be displayed up on the top. And the really cool thing is that then, because they're using a cloud and sensors and everything, when the winemaker moves to the next fermentation tank, the system Felix will understand that, switch to that tank on the data, and they just keep on doing whatever they needed to do or monitor. And they can pull up multiple at the same time. They can do whatever they need. When all of the stuff is on, it looks like Independence Day when they've got all of like the TV room with all of the data and all of those things. It's fantastic.
So Sam, what's the benefit of all of this technology? Like, does it just produce more consistent results? Is it making the wine cheaper for them to produce, or why have all that technology in a winery?
For the winemakers there, they are shooting to have all of the little intricacies that might derail a winemaking process handled. The idea behind that then allows the winemaker to have more time for creativity to, in the end, produce a better wine. And that's one of the arguments that other winemakers or other people have said sort of against this, is it's taking all the creativity out of winemaking. It's taking all of that handwork, all of that knowledge that has to come from the winemaker. It's taking it out. But the winemakers here argue that they're worrying about all of the technology, all the information they have access to allows them to be even more creative, because they don't have to worry about a lot of other things. They don't have to worry about getting an alarm at 2 a.m. if a fermenter fails. They instead know 18 hours in advance that the temperature is going to spike at this time, so we can adjust it so we don't have to worry about at 2 a.m. to come rushing down here.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's so interesting because winemaking, is considered to be this sort of sensual art and craft where the winemaker just is constantly barrel tasting and knows what's going wrong because they've tasted so much that they can smell these faults before they happen. And it's all about like being in touch with your senses, and it's very kind of primal. And so it's sort of removing that whole element. But I guess it kind of makes sense too.
It does. I really appreciate it. I think the wines are great. And it's just really cool to think about how they use drones, or I think they use a small unmanned plane actually to do those looking at the fields to see irrigation needs and whatever. And they can pull up those plots and see the green or the blue or whatever it is, if they want to see where the grapes in that tank are coming from and see how that irrigation changed over the growing time. So they can better understand what's going on in there now in terms of sugar content, in terms of whatever else they need to know.
So it seems to me that this would almost make winemaking just too surgically precise. Isn't part of the allure of wine is you get a different vintage, you get a slightly different flavor profile, and some years are better than others. It seems to me that if you have something that's this automated, it's going to make them so consistent that you just can't tell the difference between one year and the next.
I can see that, Drew, but I don't know. I think it's cool. I think there will still be differences, because no matter how much you control for, I think there's still going to be you can't control for rain. You can irrigate obviously, but you can't really control the temperature. So the ground, you're going to be mixing things up, but it's still going to be slightly different, even if you're trying to adjust for everything. Even if it's minutely, but in winemaking, minutely can still breed differences. So you're still going to get something different.
Yeah, so Sam, it sounds like nature's still affording us the ability for a happy accident every once in a while, to get a really nice random barrel of wine or vintage or harvest just due to the climate or what happened that year. So Yeah, because my worry was that, so many things that we drink now were created just, like I said, accidentally, or they just discovered that this situation happened and they're like, wow, let's continue doing that. So it's nice to know that there's still that option out there.
I have a question, though, Chase, getting back to the theme we were talking about earlier about sort of the tension between the craftsmanship, food, and tech. One problem I find when I'm tasting wines is I am not all that attracted to a wine that is technically perfect. And I think that this is true in all aesthetics. Like, it's, some of the people who are considered like the most beautiful people in the world, like they'll have a space between their teeth or, a little mole or whatever. And it's like, it's the thing that's imperfect that makes them alluring, right? And people say this about wine, like if there's a little bit of Brettanomyces, people call it Brett, a little bit of farmyard, which is a fault in the wine, people kind of pick up on that and they're like, oh, this is so earthy. And they don't realize that it's a fault. They love it. So, I mean, what do you think, Chase? I mean, do you think that there is value in something being a little bit messed up?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And, the Japanese have a whole sort of ethos and philosophy around that, the wabi-sabi scenario, where it's the little imperfections that make things what they are. So, for example, I was thinking with that winery we were just referring to, it seems like, if you created something in this sort of white box where there's no variation and you make sure that every single variable is X, Y, and Z, and you get the same product over and over again. So what's the difference between that and, like, say, McDonald's, So for me personally at home, there's a difference between wanting everything to be perfect and just sort of going with it. And then, going and buying, like, I want my frozen Tombstone pizza because I know it's the same every time.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities for both, I think. If you love that sort of Tombstone pizza, then it's great that you have that option and ability to go get it and it tastes the same every single time. But it's also great to, be able to cook your steak on your own and be able to cook it either on the grill or on a cast iron skillet or in the oven, however you want to cook it.
And I think, too, Chase, to your point, like the fermentation and the growing are all one part of it, but then after it's fermented, it will sit in a barrel for a while. They can't necessarily control what the wood is, like the grains on the wood. Sure, they can have an understanding of wherever they're getting their barrels from, what generally is going to happen. So there is still room for changes to happen. If it's a Hungarian oak cask, what they're holding the wine in, or a French oak, or whatever it may be, there's still going to be some slight differences, and then it gets blended together to find those imperfections, perfections, whatever you want, whatever the winemaker is looking for, honestly, to find that ideal expression of that vintage of that wine for that very moment.
Oh, good. Because one of the things I love about winemaking is that whole air of risk, that it's like, you only have one vintage a year and things could go wrong. So if there's something sort of thrilling about drinking wine. So now that I know that there's risk at the barrel stage, at the élevage stage, as they say, I think you've sold me on it, Sam.
I mean, I have to say they are working on technology to understand the barometric pressure within the barrels.
Oh, no.
But then there's still I think the barrel itself, I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess that the barrel itself will still offer some sort of slight difference between barrel and barrel, since they're not all going to come from the same tree. That's just impossible.
Yeah. Well, just to wrap up, Chase, you mentioned Tombstone pizza. So now I'm curious, if everyone could share their secret guilty, like, tech food pleasure or, like, industrially produced food pleasure. I mean, the Tombstone pizza, that's great. I will say, when my kids drag me to those self-serve frozen yogurt places, I totally love it. You go in and it's like, well, it's not robotic exactly, but you go up and these machines, you just basically serve yourself and mix up whatever flavors you want. It's fun, I got to say. I admit. What about you, Drew? Do you have any secret, guilty, mass-produced?
I'm struggling to think of. I mean, the first thing that popped into my head when you asked the question was just like track sushi, but like that's
yeah, exactly.
It's not like the best sushi in the world, but it's just so damn convenient, and it was such a brilliant idea.
Yeah,
I just love it passing in front of you, and you can just totally be Caligula, like, no, get that, take that away from me. Yes, that one with the eggs on top. Yes,
that's a good one. Sam. Or do you only eat artisanal products
The only
made by
thing-
fairies?
I wish I could say that. No. I really like a lot of the frozen, like taquitos and things like that. I try not to buy them when I'm at the store, but if I see it's on sale, it's a really hard sell for me not to pick up a box of like chicken and cheese taquitos and save them for an afternoon when I don't feel like doing any cooking.
And they're definitely made by a robot in a factory.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think it's time for our dessert course where we just go around and share something food or beverage related we've been enjoying this week. I think my dessert is going to be something I meant to mention earlier and I forgot to. Apparently, there's a new hologram show called Le Petit Chef where you can go into a restaurant and while you're waiting for your food, this little tiny chef like jumps off your plate and basically makes your meal for you, only it's all a 3D hologram. And it's kind of an entertaining cartoon. It's kind of crazy, but if you pull it up on YouTube, just pull up Le Petit Chef, it's kind of hard to stop watching these videos. So that's my dessert.
Yeah, I watched a few of them, Catherine. They're very cute. And I will say they sort of do it like in the several most recent Olympics where they have those floor shows, and it's the shines down. That's sort of the technology that they use. And I will say they do then give you the food that the little chef makes, right?
Yeah. And it kind of solves the problem of dining alone. Like when you're on the road, it's like, oh, well, here I don't have to talk to anyone. I can just watch the little chef.
It's very entertaining.
Chase, did you bring a dessert item for us?
So I did, and I'm a little ashamed, but not really. So Sam and I actually visited the Michael Jordan Steakhouse a few months ago, and it's up across the river in Washington. And they have a 23-layer chocolate cake there. And so since I had that cake, I've been dying for like a really good chocolate cake and just like couldn't find one anywhere in any of the grocery stores. And I'm not a baker. And so I bit the bullet and I just Googled like best chocolate cake recipe. And it's the second result on Google. And honestly, I've made it once a week since then.
Wow.
And it is delicious. Like, I cannot recommend it enough. It's a 1 bowl chocolate cake recipe. Just Google that. It's
great.
on all recipes. It's, the batter is really thin, almost watery when you make it. So I was skeptical. I was like, this is not going to work out. But once it's actually baked, it's almost fudgy and brownie-like in its sort of moisture and density. It is really top-notch. I 100% recommend it.
Sounds really good.
Yeah.
Drew, did you bring a dessert item for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm going to piggyback on earlier I was talking about sous vide. I cannot sing its praises enough, but the thing about sous vide is it doesn't completely cook like the meat all the way through. You have to finish it somehow by like searing it. And a lot of people do that with a blowtorch, but there's this really cool thing that I've been using for the past couple of years that not a lot of people know about. It's called a searzall. And it's basically an attachment that you put on a blowtorch, and it kind of diffuses the heat a little bit more and burns the fuel more completely so that you don't get that kind of like gassy propane flavor in your meat at all. And it's just wonderfully even heat, and it sears the steak perfectly so you can get that just like wall-to-wall medium rare cook with just a really caramely delicious kind of almost burnt exterior on your steaks. And it's the best way to make meat, in my opinion. It's right on par with a grill.
Okay, now if I want to Google it, is it all one word?
Searzall. Searzall.
Oh, there's a Z in
Yes.
it. Okay. I'm beginning to realize you're like a seriously hardcore cook, Drew.
I try.
We might need to have you back here.
Can I come over tonight for dinner, Drew?
Oh, absolutely.
Sam, what did you bring for dessert?
I brought a book that just came out that it's been awesome. It's called Drinking Like Ladies. And it's 75 modern cocktails from the world's leading female bartenders. And it also includes toasts to different women in history. It's written by a friend of mine, Kirsten Amon, and then her co-author, Misty Kalkofen. I don't think I said her last name right. I apologize. But it's a cocktail book. It just came out. It's got some amazing cocktails in it. I love reading through it, learning about all of these women throughout history that I've never heard of before. And it's just a beautiful book.
Oh, that sounds great. I'm going to check that out. Well, I want to thank all you panelists for being here today. Sam Slaughter, the food and drink editor at The Manual. You've written for many other publications as well, and you also have a couple books under your belt, don't you?
I have my first cocktail book coming out next year.
And what'll it be called?
It's called Grown Up Drinks, and it is all 90s inspired, pop culture inspired cocktails.
That sounds very fun.
Yes.
And the research must be very fun.
I have spent a lot of time watching Nickelodeon and other shows on YouTube since all of the shows are on there, and then listening to a lot of 90s music.
I love it. Thanks for being here, Sam.
Thank you so much.
Drew Prindle, thanks for being here. Drew's the Emerging Technologies Editor for Digital Trends. I discovered your Twitter feed today. It's so great. Everyone has to check it out. Gonzo Torpedo.
Yes, sir.
And you have like a gazillion followers.
Yeah, I feel like most of them were like kind of bought and paid for. I really don't know how it happened. I think it might have been a social media push from DT, but yeah, I don't even know what to do with that many people.
Just claim them.
Yeah, sure. I got them all organically. I have no idea how that happened.
That's awesome. Chase McPeak, the Associate Editor of Lifestyle at The Manual. Thank you for being here. And we had the founder of the Cartini Clinic here, and I saw your profile on LinkedIn, and didn't you work there at one point in your career?
I did, yes. Thanks for having me on first. And yes, I did work at the Cartini Clinic. Great place. Definitely, if you've got a child suffering with an eating disorder, give them a call.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll do everything they can to help. I was doing insurance communications, which was not exactly the most fun. We all know how healthcare is these days.
It was I just got out of college job.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here. I love how our guests always have these connections. Today's episode was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, at the studios of OPB, where we are always grateful to our sound supervisor, Stephen Cray. You can read all about us on the OPB website, and soon we will have our own website. Stay tuned. Our editor is Alex Ward. Our assistant producer is Izzy Kramer, who is the one who brought my attention to The Petite Chef. Thank you, Izzy. It wasted a lot of my time, but it was great. Our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. Everybody, please, I say this every time, and say it again, please rate our James Beard Award-winning show on iTunes. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us. Tweet us. Post on our Facebook page. Visit our Instagram feed. We want to hear from you. Bye-bye now.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.